the approach to Harrath gave him the picture before the data did. Vreth had learned over 12 years of emergency response to read the exterior of a compromised station the way a physician reads a patient's face, the structural scarring along the lower ring's transit corridor, the emergency lighting pulsing where the standard lighting had failed, the faint atmospheric shimmer at sections 4 and 6 that meant pressure differential, live breach, ongoing. He read it in the 12 seconds between the shuttle's deceleration burn and the docking clamp engagement. By the time the lock cycled, he had a working model. 47 injured, the incoming report confirmed. 9 confirmed fatalities. Unknown additional personnel still in the compromised sections. The structural engineers had given the lower ring 6 hours from the initial failure, which had been 1 hour and 22 minutes ago. He adjusted. 4 hours, 38 minutes, plus or minus the variables he would not know until he was inside. He deployed his team at the docking threshold. Sen-A and 3 second responders to sections 8 and 9, where the rescue extraction was still active. Himself to sections 5 through 7, where the highest injury concentration had been logged. He moved fast and clean, the way 12 years made fast and clean automatic. Section 5 in 4 minutes. First assessment in 4 minutes 30. By the 8-minute mark, he had evaluated 6 patients, made 4 triage decisions, and directed Senny's team to 2 additional cases the station's emergency personnel had flagged incorrectly. He entered Section 6. The woman in the corner of the corridor was talking. He registered her in his peripheral sweep and allocated her to the category of station personnel providing patient comfort, a known and manageable variable in mass casualty operations, useful for psychological management of low-priority patients, requiring eventual coordination to ensure she was not interfering with triage coverage. He registered the patient she was with. Male, probable crush injuries to the lower torso and left extremities, biosensors flagging elevated distress indicators, and noted that her intervention appeared to be providing genuine physiological stabilization. Interesting. At a clinical level, he moved to the next patient. His fingers had gone still. He did not notice this until he was 2 patients further along, reaching for his calibration tool, and found that his hand was not doing the thing hands did. He made the adjustment. He kept moving. At his 17-minute mark, the woman finished with the man in the corner. She picked up her kit, a Colonial Emergency Medical Service field kit, not core issue, worn in a way that suggested it had been everywhere she had. She was 40, 45, with the specific physical texture of a career in her posture and her eyes. She moved to the next patient without pause, without consultation, with the directional certainty of someone who had already run her own triage sweep and knew exactly where she was going. He flagged her in his mental log as SEMS personnel, field experience, assessing coverage overlap as priority. He flagged the talking as patient communication, purpose unclear, note for follow-up. He went to find his next patient. The woman died at 26 minutes. Vreth had assessed her at the 8-minute mark, internal bleeding, probable organ involvement, the specific picture of injuries that were beyond the station's current surgical capacity and that the core team could support but not reverse. He had triaged her to palliative. He had been correct to triage her to palliative. The readings that finalized at 26 minutes confirmed the assessment in both directions. She had been beyond intervention, and she had been given the most appropriate care available. The SEMS medic had spent 11 minutes on her. Vreth was 4 meters away when the readings finalized, working his own patient, a younger man with spinal involvement who required full attention. He completed his procedure. He looked up. The SEMS medic had stopped. Not for long. She was looking at the woman on the deck, plating with an expression his clinical training would have classified as grief display, which was an emotion response to patient loss documented extensively in the xenobehavioral literature and which, the literature was clear, was a liability in mass casualty contexts where its potential to produce triage hesitation and resource misallocation. He made a note to address it when the operational tempo permitted. Then the medic said something, low, in the quiet register of someone not addressing a room. His translation suite processed it. The suite flagged the construction as unusual, approximating apology, but direction anomalous, apology directed toward non-receiving party, specifically the deceased, content approximating. I could not do enough. I am sorry it was not enough. Vreth's fingers stopped moving again. The medic picked up her kit. She walked to the next patient. He stood with his mental log for a moment. The field for purpose unclear now had 2 entries. He looked at the field. He looked at the direction she had gone. He picked up his kit and followed, because there were 41 patients and 4 hours and 18 minutes. He was crossing from 7 to 6 through the emergency connector at the 2-hour mark when he saw her. She was behind the equipment locker at the Section 6 juncture, in the narrow gap between the locker's back panel and the bulkhead seam, where the emergency lighting did not quite reach. Her back was to him. He had approximately 1 second to process before he understood what he was seeing, which was a field medic who had been working for 21 hours and was now experiencing the specific physical consequence of working for 21 hours on something that cost what this cost. It was efficient. That was the detail that stopped him. Not performed, not prolonged, 90 seconds, he estimated, of a body doing what bodies did under particular conditions, with the compressed purposefulness of someone who had learned exactly how long it took and had calibrated accordingly. He stood in the connector passage. She did not see him. Then she straightened. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She pulled her kit from the floor where she had set it. She rolled her neck once, twice in the brief rotation of someone returning a joint to working order. She walked back into Section 6. Vreth stood in the connector for a moment. His circulatory lines were darkening. He could feel the change in his forearms without looking. The faint deepening of the network that meant his regulation was working harder than baseline. He had rolled his sleeves up at 40 minutes and had not thought about it since. He thought about it now. He did not roll them down. He opened his mental log. He wrote, "Non-clinical discharge between patient contacts. Estimated 90 seconds. No observable functional impairment on return." He read this back. He added, "Efficient in duration." He read this back. He deleted efficient in duration because it was doing something his clinical notes were not for. He left the rest. He added, "Purpose unclear." His log now had 3 entries marked "Purpose unclear." He kept walking. Dev was in Section 7, wedged in the structural collapse debris where the deck plating had failed and the support strut had come down at the specific angle its structural failures took when they were not considering the people below them. He was 22 years old by his emergency tag. Station technician, 2 years on Harrath. His name was Devraj Suresh. Vreth read the picture in 20 seconds. Thoracic involvement, significant. Circulatory cascade in progress. Neurological status, non-assessable from current indicators, but the cascade parameters were not compatible with viable neurological outcome at the time of assessment. Resource requirement for intervention, substantial. Projected outcome with optimal intervention, poor. Projected outcome without intervention, the cascade would complete in an estimated 40 to 60 minutes. 3 other patients in Sections 7 and 8 had better prognosis and resource requirements that intersected with Dev's. The math was not complicated. He marked the tag. He moved on. He was correct to move on. He was in Section 8, midway through his second patient, when the SEMS medic found Dev. He saw it on his peripheral sweep, the specific moment of a person reading a tag, and then the 8 seconds of stillness that followed, which he found himself timing without deciding to time. She was having an argument. He could not hear the argument. He could see it in her face and in the quality of the stillness, the internal calibration of someone weighing things that were not all the same kind of weight. He watched her weigh them. She put down her kit. She began to work. Vreth looked at his patient. He returned his attention to his patient. He finished his patient. He moved to his next patient. He moved through the next 20 minutes with the clean efficiency that 12 years had built into him. The part of his mind that triaged and assessed and allocated running at its standard operating speed. The other part of his mind, which had no official designation in the Corps training materials, was running a passive monitor on the biosensor readings, tagged to a 22-year-old station. Technician in Section 7. He came back through Section 7 at his 48th minute on station. He was not routing through Section 7. Section 7 was not on the coverage line he had planned. He became aware, as he entered the section junction, that he had made a routing choice that was not clinically motivated, which was unusual, and he noted it, and he did not change course. She had his chest open, not in the surgical sense. There was no surgical facility here, no suite, no appropriate equipment. She had done what she had with what was available, which was a core standard emergency access kit, a portable tissue welder, and something that had been 40 minutes ago. A piece of emergency hull plating from the Section 7 supply locker. She had heated the plating edge with the welder. He could see the scorch marks on the tool, and used it in a way that the hull plating had not been designed to be used, and that was, on clinical examination, working. He stopped at the section junction. His hands were not moving. His blink rate had dropped to 0. He became aware of this some time later, when he realized his eyes had not closed in over a minute, and the slight dryness registered. She was talking to Dev, not briefing him, not documenting. The low continuous register he had first heard in Section 6, unhurried and steady, saying the name from the badge, saying words that were not for information transfer. Her hands were doing two things at once. The improvised clamp held with one, the manual respiratory assist rig she had built from a station atmospheric monitor, and a piece of her own kit doing the other thing, the thing it was not designed to do, and that, by his read of its engineering, should not work. He ran the engineering in his head. He looked at what she had built. He revised his read. His circulatory lines were fully visible now. He was not thinking about his caller. She told Dev, who could not hear anything, that she was not going anywhere. She said it in the same register as the rest. Just a fact. Just a thing that was true and should be said because it was true. Her hands continued doing what they were doing. The manual assist rig continued doing what it was not designed to do. Vreth stood at the section junction with his kit and his 12 years and his top 8% outcome statistics, and watched a woman talk to a man who could not hear her while keeping him alive with a piece of hull plating, and he did not have a place to file it. His mental log was open. He wrote, "Field medic utilizing non-standard improvised intervention on patient assessed non-viable, outcome uncertain, resource allocation inconsistent with triage protocol." He read it. He wrote, "Intervention methodology unconventional but structurally sound on examination." He read that. He closed his eyes for the first time in however long it had been. He opened them. He added nothing to the report. He watched. He did not stay. There were other patients. He went back to them. He ran his passive monitor on Dev's biosensors for the next 31 minutes with the specific disciplined inattention of someone not allowing themselves to pay attention. He completed 3 patient assessments. He redirected Seni, who had finished Section 9's extraction coverage and needed updated deployment. He gave her precise and correct instructions and did not mention Dev. At minute 53, the readings changed. He was in the middle of a procedure. He finished the procedure. The readings continued to change in the direction that readings changed when they were doing the thing that Dev's readings were not supposed to do. Seni said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yes." He completed the procedure. He looked at the readings. They were stable, not the false plateau which he knew, which he had seen a dozen times. The temporary leveling before the final descent. This was different. He looked at them for a long moment, checking what he was seeing against what he knew about cascade failure trajectories and recovery curves, and the specific parameters of what had been happening in Dev's thoracic cavity for the last hour. The readings were stable. He opened his mental log. He wrote, "Patient previously assessed, non-viable showing unexpected stabilization, monitoring for persistence." He read it. He sat with it. He wrote, "Stabilization confirmed." He closed the log. Something was happening in his body that he did not have a professional language for. He noted this for later. He moved to his next patient. She was behind the bulkhead when he came through, but this time she saw him. Not immediately. He came around the Section 6 connector, and she was already 3 steps into the gap between the locker and the wall, not yet past the point of turning back, and she half-turned and they looked at each other for a moment. Her kit was on the floor. Her face was doing the thing it had been doing behind the equipment locker 40 minutes ago. He could have moved past. He stood at the connector entrance, and they looked at each other, and he understood that they had both seen things in the last several hours that neither of them was going to file correctly. She did not ask him to leave. She turned back to the wall. He stood in the connector. He waited, not with the calibrated waiting of a physician managing a patient, but with the simple waiting of someone who had decided to stay. His jaw resonance hum was faint and continuous in the quiet of the junction. He would find out later that it was audible. He did not know yet. After 60 seconds, she straightened. She picked up her kit. She looked at him once, briefly, the specific look of someone who has seen someone see them and has assessed that assessment and found it survivable. She walked back in. He followed. He had been following her through sections 6 and 7 for 4 hours. He had not consciously decided to start. He did not consciously decide not to stop. Engineer Pak's voice came through the comm at hour 5:50 minutes. Structural integrity was holding. The revised timeline had moved from 6 hours to 7. The secondary support engagement at sections 6 and 7 had stabilized the deck plating deterioration. Operations could stand down in 30 minutes. The full intensive care team would be receiving patients in the main medical bay. Transfer protocol was now in effect. Vreth completed his final assessments. He handed off to the incoming care team with full documentation, clean, accurate, every decision recorded and justifiable. He ran his resource accounting. He looked at his operational numbers. 47 injured, 11 fatalities, down from the initial 14 projected at the 2-hour mark. 36 surviving patients, of whom 29 had been stabilized for transfer. His outcome numbers, this operation, were the best of his career. He knew exactly one reason why. Dev Suresh was on a transfer stretcher, vitals stable, en route to intensive care. His tag still had Vreth's original assessment on it. Vreth had not removed the assessment. It was accurate at the time it was made. It was also no longer the last word on the subject. Both of these things were true. He found her in section 6. She was on the deck plating, back against the wall, kit in her lap, in the specific suspended state between having finished and having processed that she had finished. Not asleep, not awake, the particular stillness of a body that had been moving for 22 hours and had simply run to the edge of what moving required. Her head was up. Her eyes were open. She did not appear to be seeing the bulkhead she was looking at. He sat down next to her. He was not sure why. There was no clinical reason. There was no operational reason. Engineer Pak's all clear was in. The transfer protocol was active. He had 4 hours before he was required at the regional unit for his initial debrief. He sat down on the deck plating of a compromised section corridor in the lower ring of Harrath Station, because a woman was sitting there and the corridor was quiet and something in him, the part that had no designation in the training materials, did not want to file the report yet. She glanced at him, not surprised exactly. The dry, specific quality of someone who has already assessed more unusual things in the last 22 hours and has updated her threshold accordingly. They sat for a moment without speaking. The station systems hummed around them, the maintenance frequency of a platform returning incrementally to ordinary operation. Something in the sound registered through his jaw conduction. He breathed with it. He said, "Why do you apologize to them?" He had not planned the question. It was not in his operational notes, not in his follow-up items, not in any of the purpose unclear fields of his mental log. It had been there since the 26-minute mark, formed and unasked, and it came out now in the quiet because there was nothing left to put in front of it. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her finding the words, not hesitating exactly, but locating, with the care of someone for whom this was not a thing she talked about and who had decided, at some point in the last sentence, that she would. She said, "Because they deserved better than what I had to offer, and someone should say so." He sat with it. He had 12 years of Corps service and 114 mass casualty patients and outcome statistics in the top 8% and a precise and functional understanding of what medicine was. 4. He had triaged correctly every time by every measurable standard. He had not wasted resources. He had not let variables contaminate decisions. He had, by every clinical metric, done his job well. He had never once apologized to a patient he lost, because his patients did not need his apology, and his apology would not change his numbers, and his training had not included it. He thought about Dev Suresh's stabilization reading. He thought about the specific 8 seconds of stillness before she began working on him, the weight of a decision being made with full knowledge of what it cost. He thought about hull plating and portable welders and a respiratory rig that should not have worked. He thought about someone talking to a person who could not hear them for 53 minutes, saying, "You're not alone in this. I am not going anywhere." He thought about what it cost. He thought about 60 seconds behind a bulkhead. He thought about a woman eating something not worth dying for in a cafeteria 6 hours before a mass casualty event, and then, when the alerts went off, walking into the lower ring with a single field kit because that is what she did. He thought about 36 patients alive tonight who had not all been alive at his 2-hour mark. He thought about the word he did not have. He had looked, during the operation, in the gaps, in the passive monitoring minutes, with the involuntary thoroughness of a mind that filed things. He had looked in Solvani, which had excellent words for clinical precision and measured duty, and the grief that came from doing correct work in incorrect circumstances. He had looked in the 12 other languages his translation suite drew from. He had not found it. The gap in every language he knew was the same shape. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not reduce the answer she had given him, and he had spent 12 years learning not to reduce things for the sake of filling silence. After a while, he became aware that her head was closer to his shoulder than it had been. He glanced down. The incremental descent, the specific slow-motion surrender of a body that had held everything it could hold and was now, in the quiet, letting the last tension go. He sat very still. His jaw resonance hum was steady and low, almost inaudible. He would learn later that she had heard it and had decided, in whatever barely conscious register she was operating in, that it sounded like something safe. He did not move. He was on duty for another 4 hours. He had a debrief and a formal operational report and 36 surviving patients whose care he would need to review. He sat with his back against the wall of Section 6, and his kit at his feet, and a woman asleep against his shoulder, and the station humming its maintenance frequencies around him. And he did not file the report yet. He wrote the report 3 days later at his terminal in the regional unit. It was complete and accurate and correctly structured. The casualty count, the triage decisions, the resource accounting, the joint operation integration assessment, the structural timeline parameters, his outcome statistics. He wrote about the improvised interventions he had observed, with clinical specificity. He wrote about the materials used, the methodology employed, the results achieved. He wrote about Dev Suresh in the non-viable assessment field and in the outcome field, where the two entries sat side by side, assessed non-viable at 14:23, confirmed stable at 16:09, like two photographs of the same room taken 46 minutes apart and looking nothing alike. He opened his personal log. He created a new entry. He wrote a description, as precisely as he could, the refusal to allow probability to determine effort, not in ignorance of probability, but in full knowledge of it, in service of the individual patient rather than the aggregate outcome. He read it. He read it again. It was accurate. It described the thing. A description was not a word. A word had to be shorter. A word had to be the kind of thing you could carry in your mouth and hand to someone and have them understand. He left the name field blank. He read the description again and added a second line, not a description, just a thing that was true and needed to be written down somewhere. Dev Suresh, Harrath Station, is alive. He sat with the blank field for a long time. He thought about how languages grew, not invented but grown, in the way that living things grew when the conditions required them. His civilization had words for everything it had done long enough to need to name. The blank field was not a failure. It was a record of something real that existed without a name yet, which meant it was the beginning of a word. The word would come. He did not think it would take as long as it might have before Harrath. He did not think he was the only one looking. He closed the log. He opened a new document. Blank, unformatted. No header, no fields, no clinical structure. He sat looking at it for a moment. His fingers were in their normal low motion, the subtle continuous adjustment that meant his mind was processing. His circulatory lines were at baseline. The regional unit was quiet around him, the ordinary quiet of a station running its ordinary work. He thought about a Section 6 corridor at 4 in the morning. He thought about a question that had waited 8 hours to be asked, and an answer that needed no follow-up. He thought about something not worth dying for, said in the middle of the worst day of Harrath Station's operational history, not performed, not deflecting, just said, in the voice of someone narrating a fact about cafeteria food to no one in particular, while everything came apart around them. He thought about the particular quality of caring for the individual person in front of you. Not the aggregate, not the outcome statistics, not the resource model, but the specific irreplaceable weight of one person who had a name on their badge, and a home they came from, and a number of years that had either been enough or had not. He thought about what it meant to refuse to let the data be the end of the story, not in denial, not in error, but as a choice made in full knowledge of the odds, offered freely to someone who could not even receive it. He began to write. He was not sure what he was writing. It was not a report. It was longer than a log entry and less structured than anything he had filed before, and his fingers moved steadily and his circulatory lines were warm and the blank field where the word should go sat open in the background of his mind like a window he had just remembered was there. He would leave it open. The word would come, or it would come, or he would build it out of the pieces of what he was writing now. The careful, inadequate description slowly worn smooth by use until it was short enough to carry. Outside the regional unit's viewport, the sector went about its work. Logistics and transit and commerce, the unglamorous traffic of stations that existed to keep things moving. Somewhere in that traffic, a shuttle was carrying a 44-year-old field medic to her next posting, and she was probably eating something and she would arrive, and the alerts would eventually go off and she would pick up her kit and walk in. He wrote. The blank field stayed blank. The document grew. He did not delete anything.